I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would end up confessing her life to strangers. But here we are. A single sentence shattered my family, and a few quiet signatures finished what years of neglect began. Hi, I'm Margaret Maggie Holloway. I'm 72 years old. And I'm not the villain in this story, no matter how much my son would like me to be. I'll start at the beginning, because that's where the rot always is. I was standing in my own kitchen when my son said it. I remember because the kettle had just started screaming, that sharp metallic whistle that drills into your temples, and I was fumbling for a towel because my hands were damp. The morning light was slanting in through the window, catching dust motes like tiny floating accusations. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood, and something faintly medicinal, the way it always does now. "Mom," he said, not unkindly, not kindly either, just flat. "You're kind of extra." He didn't look at me when he said it. He was scrolling on his phone, one leg hooked around the kitchen stool like he might bolt at any second. Extra. I laughed at first, because what else do you do when a word lands wrong, but you're not ready to admit it hurt? Extra how? I asked, pouring hot water over the tea bag like my hands weren't shaking. He sighed. That long, theatrical sigh that told me I was already exhausting him. "You worry too much. You insert yourself. You make everything about you." I stood there, spoon clinking against porcelain, and felt something shift inside me. Not break, shift, like a tectonic plate, finally deciding it had had enough. "This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you," I snapped. I didn't. I nodded. I said, "I see." I even smiled, the polite kind I learned in the 1970s when women were trained to swallow entire storms. But something in me started paying attention after that. "I should tell you about the house. It's old. Not charming old in the magazine sense, but real old, with uneven floors and doors that only close if you lift them just right. I bought it with my late husband, Frank, back when interest rates were obscene, and we were young enough to think hard work solved everything. We raised our son, Daniel, here. Birthday parties in the backyard. Scraped knees on the front steps. Frank's laugh echoing down the hallway before cancer took him piece by piece. After Frank died, the house got quieter. Not sad quiet, watchful quiet. Daniel started visiting more then, at first. He'd bring groceries I didn't ask for, rearrange my cabinets, talk slowly like I'd suddenly misplaced my mind along with my husband. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was love. Years passed. The visits changed. Shorter, more impatient, always with an agenda. "Mom, you should think about downsizing." "Mom, this place is a lot for you." "Mom, have you thought about assisted living?" Always said lightly, always framed as concern. And I've always agreed. Out loud. Inside, I watched. After the extra comment, things accelerated. Daniel started bringing his wife, Claire, more often. Claire is one of those women who smiles with her mouth, but not her eyes. Her eyes are always measuring, counting, calculating square footage, resale value. How soon is too soon to ask? She'd sit at my dining table, tapping manicured nails against the wood Frank refinished himself, and say things like, "This table must be worth a fortune. They don't make craftsmanship like this anymore." Daniel would nod, already mentally liquidating my life. I began noticing the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. The way Daniel's tone shifted when he talked about my finances, like he was already the steward of them. The way Claire corrected me in my own home. "No, Maggie," she said once, laughing softly. "That's not how we do it anymore. We." That word stuck to my ribs. The day that really settled it for me came on a Tuesday. Ordinary days are always the most dangerous. I'd gone to my doctor that morning. Nothing serious, just routine blood work. But Daniel insisted on coming. "I should be there," he said. "Just in case." In case of what, he didn't say. In the exam room, while the nurse tied the rubber band around my arm, Daniel answered questions directed at me. No allergies, he said. I do have allergies, I corrected gently. Penicillin. He waved his hand. She means mild. The nurse looked between us, uncertain. I felt suddenly invisible, like I was already fading out of my own body. In the car afterward, Daniel checked his watch. I've got a meeting, he said. But listen, Mom, we should really talk about putting me on your accounts, just for emergencies. I stared out the window at a woman walking her dog, at the normalcy of it, and thought, when did my life become an emergency to be managed? That night, alone in my house, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote one word at the top. Extra. I let myself feel it then. The anger, the grief, the humiliation, 72 years distilled into an inconvenience. I cried, but not loudly. Quiet tears, the kind that don't ask for comfort. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a lawyer. Her name was Susan Klein. She had a calm voice and an office that smelled like coffee and old books. When I told her why I was there, she didn't interrupt. She just listened, pen poised but unmoving. Tell me what you want, she said finally. The question stunned me. What did I want? I thought of Frank, of the house, of the way Daniel looked through me now. Not at me. Of being called extra in my own kitchen. I want, I said slowly, to stop feeling like a guest in my own life. Susan nodded. Then we start with your will. Over the next few weeks I learned things. About trusts. About beneficiaries. About how much power a quiet woman can still wield if she pays attention. I didn't change anything yet. Not on paper. Instead, I observed, Daniel started calling more, his tone sirupy. Just checking in, Mom. Claire started suggesting estate planners, care facilities, peace of mind. One evening I overheard them in the hallway. They thought I was asleep. She doesn't need all this space, Claire whispered. It's selfish. Daniel murmured agreement. Selfish. I lay there in the dark, heart pounding, and realized something terrifying and clarifying all at once. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were waiting for me to disappear. The next morning, I made breakfast like always. Bacon crisped just the way Daniel liked it. Coffee strong. When he came into the kitchen, I smiled. He hesitated, like he was trying to read me. Mom, he said, you okay? I'm fine, I replied. Just simplifying. He smiled back, relieved. Good, that's good. If only he'd known what I meant. That's where this chapter of my life truly began. Not with a fight, but with a decision made quietly, over toast crumbs and cooling coffee. And no, the will hadn't changed yet. But it would. After that morning, I became a student of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that listens. I simplified, like I told Daniel. I stopped volunteering information. Stopped filling the empty spaces in conversations with explanations he no longer wanted. When he asked how I was feeling, I said, fine. When Claire commented on the house, I said, Emma. I watched how quickly they relaxed when I didn't push back. How comfort bloomed when I shrank. It was instructional. I started noticing patterns. Daniel only came by when he needed something. A document, a signature, reassurance. He'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched forward, elbows wide, occupying space like he owned it. He'd talk about his stress, his job, his kids, my grandchildren, who I saw mostly through photos now. If I tried to redirect, he'd glance at his phone. Sorry, Mom, just a lot going on. Always a lot going on, just not me. One afternoon, Claire came alone. That was new. She let herself in with the spare key Daniel had insisted I give them for emergencies. I was in the living room folding laundry when I heard the door open. Maggie? She called out, sing-song. In here, I said. She perched on the arm of the couch like a bird, smoothing her skirt. She smelled expensive, citrus and something sharp underneath. I was just in the neighborhood, she said. Thought I'd check on you. I folded a towel carefully. That's kind. She smiled. We worry. We again. Her eyes drifted around the room. The framed photos. Frank in his work boots. Daniel at 8, missing 2 teeth. Claire lingered on a picture of the house, taken decades ago when it was new to us. Have you thought any more about plans? She asked lightly. Plans for what? You know, she said, waving her hand. Later, making things easier. For whom? I asked. The smile flickered. Just a hairline crack. For everyone, she said, a touch firmer. Daniel especially. He has so much on his plate. I nodded. He always has. She leaned forward. You don't want to be a burden. There it was. The word they never used out loud before. I folded the last towel. I've taken care of myself a long time. I know, she said quickly. But things change. Yes, I agreed. They do. She left not long after, a little stiffer than when she arrived. When the door closed behind her, I sat very still, listening to the house settle around me. The tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own breathing, steady and stubborn. That evening, I pulled out the legal pad again. I wrote down names, dates, small moments that felt big in hindsight. When Daniel took over the conversation at the doctor's office, when Claire called the house too much, when they stopped asking what I wanted and started telling me what I needed. I wasn't planning revenge yet. Not consciously. I was building a record. Susan noticed the shift immediately at our next meeting. You're clearer, she said, skimming her notes. Calmer. I'm paying attention, I told her. She smiled. That's usually when things get interesting. We talked about contingencies, about what would happen if I became incapacitated, about who I trusted. Do you trust your son? She asked gently. The old me would have said yes without thinking. Loyalty by default. This time, I paused. I trust him, I said slowly, to act in his own interest. Susan nodded like she'd expected that. I asked her about charitable trusts, about conditional bequests, about what power I retained as long as I was breathing. Quite a lot, she said. Good. Back home, I started making changes so small they were almost invisible. I canceled the spare credit card Daniel had for emergencies. I redirected my mail. I locked away documents I'd once left in plain sight. Daniel noticed eventually. Mom, he said one afternoon, leaning against the counter. Did you move some paperwork? I was looking for the insurance folder. I reorganized, I said. He frowned. You should tell me before you do stuff like that. I looked at him, really looked. I don't recall asking permission, I said calmly. His eyes widened just a fraction. I didn't mean. I know, I said. You didn't. That night, he didn't stay long. A week later, he brought the kids. That's when I knew something was up. He used them like punctuation. Proof of family. Leverage. The kids ran through the house, laughing, touching things like it all belonged to them already. Claire watched me closely as I interacted with them, gauging my softness. Daniel waited until the kids were outside before he spoke. Mom, he said, lowering his voice, we're thinking about the future, about what's best. For whom? I asked again. For you, he said, too quickly. And for the kids. This house could really help with their college someday. There it was. The inheritance, finally spoken aloud. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, resolution. This house helped raise you, I said. It did its job. He laughed, uneasy. That's not what I meant. I know, I said. Claire chimed in. You don't need all this space. And honestly, it's a lot of upkeep. I manage, I said. For now, Daniel added. The implication hung between us like smoke. I smiled. I've made arrangements. They froze. What kind of arrangements? Daniel asked. Practical ones, I said lightly. You don't need to worry. Claire's hand found Daniel's arm. We should be involved, she said. It affects us. I tilted my head. Does it? Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, don't be difficult. Difficult. Extra. Burden. Words stack up, don't they? Brick by brick. I'm tired, I said, standing. The kids should wash their hands before dinner. They left shortly after, the air thick with unasked questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, thinking about all the ways women my age are trained to fade quietly. How resistance is labeled confusion. How boundaries become ingratitude. I thought about Frank, about how he trusted Daniel completely, about what he'd say if he could see this. And for the first time, I let myself imagine not just protecting what was mine, but choosing where it would go. The next morning, I went through the house with a notebook, room by room, memory by memory. The piano no one played anymore, the garden I still tended, the guest room that had become a storage space for things no one wanted until they were worth something. I realized something then that made me laugh out loud, alone in the hallway. They thought the will was the end of the story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. Because a will doesn't just distribute assets, it delivers messages, and I had a few I'd been holding onto for years. By the time Daniel called that evening, his voice tight and controlled, I was already somewhere else mentally, standing on the edge of a choice that felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Mom, he said, we need to talk. Yes, I replied, sitting down at the kitchen table. We do. And as I hung up the phone, I felt it clearly now. Not fear. Power. Daniel and Claire showed up on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced but clearly planned. I could tell by the way Claire's hair was done just a little too neatly, by the tightness in Daniel's jaw that meant he'd rehearsed this in the car. The kids weren't with them this time. That, more than anything, told me this wasn't a family visit. This was a meeting. Maggie, Claire said brightly, holding out the dish like an offering. I made lasagna. We thought you might not feel like cooking. I took it, feeling the heat through the foil. That's thoughtful, I said. I meant only that it was warm. They settled into the living room without asking, Daniel on the couch, Claire in Frank's old armchair. She crossed her legs, the heel of her shoe tapping once against the floor, then stopping. Nervous, good. Daniel cleared his throat. We've been talking. I sat across from them, folding my hands in my lap. I could feel my heart beating steady but strong, like it had finally remembered its job. I'm sure you have, I said. Claire jumped in. We're concerned, Maggie. You've been distant. I've been busy, I replied. With what? Daniel asked, and there it was. That edge, the expectation that I owed him an answer. With my life, I said calmly. Silence stretched. The clock ticked. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on pavement. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, you're shutting us out. I tilted my head. Am I? Or am I just not handing you the keys anymore? Claire's lips pressed together. That's not fair. Neither is calling me extra in my own kitchen, I said quietly. Daniel's face flushed. That was taken out of context. Was it? I asked, because it felt pretty clear to me. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Claire shot him a look, then turned back to me, voice softer. You know we love you, she said. We just want what's best. For whom? I asked for the third time. For everyone, she insisted. I stood then slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years, and walked to the bookshelf. I ran my fingers along the spines, stopping at a framed photo tucked between two novels. Frank and me, arms around each other, laughing at something only we knew. I spent decades doing what was best for everyone else, I said, not turning around. I raised a child. I buried a husband. I kept this house standing when grief nearly took the roof off. Now I'm being told I'm a problem to be managed. Daniel stood abruptly. No one said that. You didn't have to, I replied, facing him now. You implied it, over and over. Claire rose too, her voice sharpening. You're being dramatic. I smiled then, really smiled. That's funny. You always said I was too emotional. Too much, extra. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Mom, this isn't productive. On the contrary, I said. This is the most honest conversation we've had in years. I walked back to my chair and sat. You want to talk about the future? Let's talk about it. They exchanged a look. Daniel nodded, like he was bracing himself. I've updated my estate plans, I said. Claire's breath caught. Daniel's eyes locked on mine. Without telling us? Yes. You can't just, Daniel started. I can, I interrupted. And I did. Claire forced a smile. We should be involved. It affects the family. I am the family, I said. And I'm still alive. Daniel's voice dropped. What did you do? I leaned back. I made choices. The air felt thick, like before a storm breaks. Choices like what? Claire pressed. Like deciding that anyone who sees me as an obstacle doesn't get rewarded for it, I said. Daniel's face hardened. So this is punishment. No, I said. This is consequence. He laughed bitterly. You're being vindictive. I'm being deliberate, I corrected. Claire's composure cracked. After everything we've done for you? I met her gaze. Name one thing you did that didn't come with strings. She faltered. Daniel stepped in. You're going to tear this family apart over hurt feelings. I felt a flicker then. Old guilt, old training. But it passed. This family was already fractured, I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Daniel paced. What did you change? Tell us. I thought of Susan's office. Of the papers spread neatly on the desk. Of the pen heavy in my hand when I signed. I redirected most of my assets into a trust, I said. One that benefits causes I care about. Education, housing, legal aid. Claire's mouth fell open. What about us? There are provisions, I said. Conditional ones. Daniel stopped pacing. Conditional how? I looked at him, really looked at the boy I raised, the man he'd become. Based on respect, I said. Involvement. Actual care. Not convenience. He scoffed. You're controlling us from the grave. I'm setting boundaries while I'm alive, I said. Claire's voice rose. This is insane. You're letting strangers have what should go to your family. I stood again, my legs steady. Strangers haven't treated me like I'm already gone. That did it. Daniel exploded. You're doing this to hurt us. No, I said, my voice quiet but unshaking. I'm doing this because you already did. The room vibrated with unsaid things. Regrets, accusations, years of entitlement crashing into one moment. Finally, Daniel grabbed his coat. I can't believe you. I believe you, I said. I just see you clearly now. Claire followed him, fury etched into every line of her body. At the door, she turned. You'll regret this, she said. I nodded. Maybe. But it will be my regret. The door slammed. The house shook, then settled. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet return. My hands trembled then, not from fear, but from release. I sank into Frank's chair and laughed, a short, surprised sound. I felt lighter. Sad, yes, but lighter. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. The fallout came quickly. Missed calls, long texts, then silence. Weeks passed. I filled them with things I postponed. Lunches with old friends, volunteering at the library, long walks through my neighborhood, where people knew my name and asked how I was, and waited for the answer. One afternoon, Susan called. They're contesting, she said calmly. I smiled into the phone. Of course they are. We're prepared, she added. I know, I said. After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching leaves fall into the yard Frank once raked. I thought about legacy. Not money, not houses, but the story people tell about you when you're no longer useful to them. For the first time, I was writing my own. And the will, it was only part of it. Because what Daniel still didn't understand, what Claire couldn't see past her calculations, was that I wasn't done living yet. And the final chapter. That one would be unforgettable. A thick one. Cream paper. My name typed, not handwritten. Daniel's way of keeping emotion at arm's length. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen table and made myself tea. The kettle screamed like it always had. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and thyme. I sat down across from the envelope like it was a person I used to know. When I finally opened it, the words were exactly what you'd expect. How could you? After everything. We're family. You're being manipulated. This isn't you. That last one made me laugh. A short, sharp sound that surprised even me. This isn't you. As if I hadn't spent 72 years becoming myself. There were legal words too. Formal ones. Contest. Undue influence. Mental capacity. They stung less than the emotional barbs, which were clearly designed to hook into whatever guilt still lived in me. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I did something I never would have done before. I didn't respond. The contest dragged on for months. Meetings, depositions, carefully neutral conference rooms that smelled like carpet cleaner and stress. Daniel avoided looking at me across polished tables. Claire stared openly, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief, like I'd violated some unspoken contract, I refusing to die on schedule. Their lawyer asked me questions in a voice so gentle it felt condescending. Mrs. Holloway, do you feel confused often? No, I said. Do you feel lonely? Sometimes, I replied. So does everyone. Were you angry with your son when you made these changes? I paused, just long enough to be honest. I was clear. Susan's hand rested lightly on my arm. Grounding, present. They tried to paint me as fragile, as manipulated, as a grieving widow who didn't know what she was doing. And I sat there, back straight, voice steady, telling the story exactly as it happened. About being talked over, about being minimized, about being called extra, about realizing that love without respect is just control in a nicer outfit. The turning point came unexpectedly. Claire, flustered and sharp, snapped during a break. She didn't know I could hear her from the hallway. She's doing this to punish us, she hissed. She doesn't need all that money anyway. Need. That word again. Susan heard it too. She met my eyes and smiled, small and satisfied. The contest didn't go their way. It was settled quietly, mostly in my favor. Daniel showed up at my house one last time after that. Alone. No Claire. No kids. He looked older, smaller, like someone who'd lost a battle he didn't think he could lose. I don't understand you, he said, standing in my doorway. I know, I replied. You chose strangers over me. I shook my head. I chose myself. He swallowed. You could have just talked to me. I tried, I said gently. You weren't listening. Silence stretched between us, heavy and final. I hope you're happy, he said at last. I considered it. Really considered it. I'm at peace, I answered. There's a difference. He nodded once, stiffly, and left. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it for a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious either. I felt complete. Now here's the part no one expects. I didn't sell the house. I didn't move away. Instead, I opened it up. I host community dinners once a week now. Students, single mothers, retirees, people who are tired of being told they're too much or not enough. The piano gets played again. Poorly sometimes, joyfully always. The garden is bigger, wilder, my will still stands, the trust still exists, the message is already written. But the real revenge, the real triumph, was realizing I didn't need to burn anything down to prove my worth. I just needed to stop shrinking. If Daniel ever reads this, I hope he understands one thing. I wasn't extra. I was essential, just not to him, and that was never my failure.